You're using my work. You're asking for my help. Acknowledge that publicly. My words hung in the air of the downtown law office. The conference room fell silent, thick with tension you could almost touch. Victoria Reynolds, the woman who had so casually dismissed me 3 months ago, now sat across the polished mahogany table, dark circles under her eyes, her normally perfect hair pulled back severely. Beside her, Northwell's lawyer and a board representative exchanged nervous glances. I felt Rebecca Morgan, my attorney, shift slightly beside me, a subtle gesture of support. The satisfaction coursing through me was unexpected. Not because their system was failing, I'd predicted that, but because for the first time in years, I was fighting not just for my work, but for myself. For Sarah Johnson. Victoria broke the silence. We can agree to the financial terms, but the acknowledgement creates a complicated precedent. I almost laughed. Complicated? No. What was complicated was building a system that processed billions in transactions without a single security breach for 12 years. What was complicated was sacrificing my marriage and my relationship with my daughter Lisa for that system. What was complicated was being pushed aside by people who had no idea what they were destroying. The board representative cleared his throat. We'll need time to discuss internally. Rebecca smiled slightly. Of course, but I should note that Sarah has received inquiries from other organizations. Her schedule is filling up quickly. It was a bluff, but Victoria's expression tightened instantly. Give us 24 hours, she said. As we left the building, I couldn't help but think of how I'd gotten here. A 46-year-old divorced woman fighting for the recognition of her life's work, while simultaneously trying to repair the relationship with her only daughter. The two battles seemed impossibly intertwined. Flashback, the beginning of the end. 3 months earlier, I sat across from Victoria in her office, staring in disbelief at the words coming out of her mouth. Are we seriously considering a complete rewrite of the platform? The system I've spent the last 12 years perfecting? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Victoria tapped her pen against the sleek mahogany desk that had appeared the day after her promotion to Chief Technology Officer. Sarah, you have to understand, everything is moving to cloud-native architecture these days. Your system, while impressive for its time, just isn't where modern tech needs to be. Where modern tech needs to be, I repeated quietly, the words tasting bitter. The system hasn't had a single security breach in 12 years. It's processed over $18 billion in transactions. But sure, let's throw it out because it's not trendy enough. I was the senior systems architect at Northwell Logistics in Portland. At 46, I'd built our internal platform from scratch. Every module, every security feature, every encryption layer. It wasn't flashy, but it was bulletproof. And now, Brandon Taylor, a consultant who'd been with the company for all of 6 weeks, was convinced it all needed to go. Victoria sighed, finally looking up at me. The board has already approved Brandon's proposal. We're not here to debate whether we're doing the rewrite. We're here to discuss your role in the transition. I felt something shift inside me. Then a cold certainty settled in my stomach. In that moment, I knew my days at Northwell were numbered, just like my marriage had been when David found me still working at 2 a.m. for the 5th night in a row. Let me guess, you want me to document everything, train the new team, and then what? Move to a strategic advisory role? I made air quotes with my fingers. Victoria had the decency to look uncomfortable. We value your institutional knowledge, Sarah. No one knows the system like you do. But legacy systems are liabilities. Isn't that what Brandon keeps saying in those fancy presentations? I challenged her. She didn't deny it. Instead, she slid a folder across the desk toward me. This is the transition plan. The team will need comprehensive documentation on all core modules within 4 weeks. After that, there will be a knowledge transfer phase of approximately 3 months. I didn't reach for the folder. And then? And then we'll discuss next steps. Her voice was smooth, politician-like. Translation. We'll show you the door once we've extracted everything we need. Flashback. A different time. I still remember the day I started at Northwell Logistics. It was 2011, and the company was just a scrappy startup with 15 employees working out of a converted warehouse. Thomas Wilson, the founder, had interviewed me himself. We need something more robust, Thomas had told me, his eyes bright with entrepreneurial fire. Something that can scale with us, something secure. Thomas was different from the managers I'd worked with before. He understood value over trends, substance over style. He reminded me of my father, a carpenter who had built things to last, not to impress. Dad had always told me, if you're going to build something, build it right. I carried that lesson into every line of code I wrote. It took me 3 years to build the first complete version of the platform. I worked 80-hour weeks, survived on coffee and determination. The early team used to joke that I was more machine than human, typing away long after everyone else had gone home. Don't you have a life outside of code? Teresa from accounting once asked me. The truth was, I did, or I had. Lisa was 10 when I started at Northwell, still eager for bedtime stories and weekend adventures. David, my husband then, had supported my career initially, proud of my technical prowess. But as the months of late nights stacked up, something changed. The bedtime stories became fewer, the weekend adventures rarer. Mom, you promised you'd come to my ballet recital, Lisa had said, her voice small, her eyes large with disappointment. I know, sweetie, but this deployment is critical. I'll make it up to you, I promise. How many times had I said those words? How many promises had I broken? By the time Lisa entered high school, David and I were sleeping in separate bedrooms. By the time she graduated, we were divorced. You're married to your work, Sarah, David had said the night he moved out. There's no room for us in your life. He wasn't wrong. But the system was my magnum opus. Every line I wrote, every module I designed felt like a piece of myself embedded into the company. The platform grew as Northwell grew, from 15 employees to 50, then to hundreds, as we expanded across the Pacific Northwest. Our client list went from local businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Throughout it all, my platform held steady, scaling and adapting. The security modules were my particular pride. I developed a custom encryption library after discovering vulnerabilities in some of the standard options. I called it Johnson Secure, my small vanity, and licensed it to Northwell under specific terms. I was meticulous about the licensing agreement, ensuring I maintained authorship and control. It seemed like a technicality at the time. I had no plans to leave. After all, the system had already cost me my family. I wasn't about to abandon it too. At Northwell, the changing tide. Over the years, executives came and went. Thomas sold his stake and moved on to new ventures. The board brought in professional management with MBAs and corporate backgrounds. Suddenly, there were layers of hierarchy where once we all reported directly to the founders. I stayed focused on the platform, adding new modules as needed, hardening security, optimizing performance. It wasn't the most exciting work, but there was satisfaction in maintaining something reliable. Like my father's cabinets that still stood in my childhood home, my system endured. Then came the new wave of leadership, including Victoria Reynolds as CTO. She'd come from a high-profile role at a tech giant and clearly had ambitions beyond Northwell. With her designer suits and strategic name-dropping, Victoria reminded me of the girls who had excluded me in high school, the ones who cared more about appearance than substance. Shortly after her arrival, she brought in Brandon Taylor as a consultant. He'll help us modernize our approach, she announced at an all-hands meeting. Brandon specializes in digital transformation and cloud migration. I watched as Brandon charmed his way through the company, conducting interviews, hosting workshops, giving presentations filled with buzzwords and colorful charts. He spoke with overwhelming confidence about technologies he clearly only understood superficially. With his tailored suits and perfect smile, Brandon had the polished look of someone who'd never had to prove himself through actual results. He'd been born into the tech world's equivalent of royalty, an Ivy League degree and a father who sat on multiple corporate boards. For him, success was an inheritance, not an achievement. Your platform is interesting, he told me during our first one-on-one, in a tone that suggested he meant the opposite. Very monolithic, very 2010. I should have seen the writing on the wall right then. The first real blow came during the quarterly technology review. I was scheduled to present the platform upgrade roadmap I'd been working on for months, plans to modularize certain components while maintaining the rock-solid security foundation. But when I arrived at the conference room, Brandon was already projecting his slides. We've taken a deep dive into the current architecture, he was saying, and identified significant technical debt that's holding Northwell back from true digital agility. I slipped into a seat at the back of the room, watching as Brandon presented what amounted to a complete dismantling of my life's work. He showed complicated diagrams contrasting the legacy monolith, represented by an ominous gray block, with a colorful, distributed cloud architecture. The current system architecture represents significant enterprise risk, he declared, clicking to a slide titled Risk Assessment. It's vulnerable to single points of failure, limits our ability to leverage cutting-edge cloud services, and frankly depends too heavily on tribal knowledge. That last point was accompanied by a knowing glance toward me. The subtext was clear. I was the tribe, and my knowledge was a liability, not an asset. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think of Lisa. She was 20 now, in her second year of college. Our relationship was strained at best, non-existent at worst. The previous Thanksgiving, she'd chosen to stay at her father's rather than visit me. "It's not personal, Mom," she texted. "Dad just makes plans I can actually count on." The words had stung because they were true. How many times had I canceled on her because of a work emergency? How many soccer games and school plays had I missed? Questions? Brandon asked after outlining a proposal for a complete rewrite that would take only 18 months. "Yes," I said, raising my hand. "Have you analyzed the actual performance metrics of the current system or calculated the security implications of moving our client data to a distributed cloud architecture?" Brandon smiled thinly. "The benefits of cloud-native architecture are well documented in the industry, Sarah. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here." "That's not what I asked," I pressed. "Our current system has maintained 99.97% uptime over the past 5 years and zero security breaches. What's your projected reliability for this new architecture?" The room grew uncomfortable. Victoria stepped in before Brandon could respond. "These are details we'll flesh out in the implementation planning," she said smoothly. "Today's session is about strategic direction. In other words, we've already decided, so stop asking inconvenient questions." After the meeting, Michael from the development team caught up with me in the hallway. He'd been at Northwell almost as long as I had. "That was brutal," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, most of us know the platform isn't the problem. Politics." I nodded, appreciating the solidarity but recognizing its limits. Michael had 3 kids and a mortgage. He couldn't afford to be on the wrong side of this fight. That evening, I stayed late alone in the office as usual. I accessed the repository containing the Johnson Secure Library and reviewed the licensing terms. Just as I remembered, Northwell had a license to use it, but I retained complete ownership and authorship rights. More importantly, the documentation for how it integrated with the platform's most critical security features existed primarily in my head. I made a complete backup of everything, including my personal notes and design documents. A strange calm settled over me. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. That wasn't my style. But I also wasn't going to make this easy for them. They wanted my system gone? Fine. They would learn exactly what they were losing. As I drove home that night, I passed Lisa's old high school and felt a familiar pang of regret. I'd missed so much, sacrificed so much for a company that now saw me as disposable. Was it worth it? Had it ever been? The dismissal. The next 3 months were a master class in corporate double-speak. I was simultaneously crucial to the transition strategy and clearly on my way out. I sat through countless meetings where Brandon and his growing team of new hires dissected my work, often misunderstanding fundamental aspects of the architecture. "The authentication module seems unnecessarily complex," one of the new developers commented during a code review session. "We could replace this with a standard implementation." I had to bite my tongue. The authentication system was complex because it handled specialized access control for regulated industries, with automatic compliance logging that satisfied 3 different international standards. But explaining that would just label me as resistant to change. Instead, I dutifully documented everything they asked for, conducted knowledge transfer sessions, and answered questions. But I was selective about the depth I went into, especially regarding Johnson Secure. This encryption library, Is this open source? Brandon asked one afternoon, frowning at his screen. No, it's proprietary, I replied carefully. Licensed to Northwell under specific terms. He made a note without looking up. We'll probably replace it with industry standard encryption. I didn't bother explaining that Johnson Secure used customized implementation with additional security layers specifically designed for our data types. Again, what would be the point? As the transition progressed, I became increasingly isolated. My team was gradually reassigned to the modernization project. My input was required less and less frequently. I could feel myself being pushed to the margins. One Tuesday morning, I found myself alone at my desk while everyone else was in a planning meeting I hadn't been invited to. My computer pinged with a calendar invitation. Transition planning, HR office, tomorrow 10 a.m. So this was it. I spent the rest of the day organizing my personal items and downloading my work to an external drive, nothing confidential or proprietary, just my own notes, designs, and the Johnson Secure documentation I'd written. That evening, I tried calling Lisa. It had been weeks since we'd spoken, and suddenly I felt an urgent need to hear her voice. The call went to voicemail after 4 rings. Hi Lisa, it's Mom. I wanted to hear how you're doing. Call me when you can. Love you. As I hung up, I glanced at the framed photo on my nightstand, Lisa at her high school graduation, standing between David and me, her smile strained. We were trying to look like a family for just one more day. I had been so proud of her, and so aware of how little I'd contributed to her reaching that milestone. The next morning, I met with Patricia from HR and Victoria. The conversation was predictably sterile. As the modernization project enters its next phase, we're restructuring the development organization, Patricia explained, reading from what was clearly a prepared script. Unfortunately, your current role won't exist in the new structure. We want to thank you for your years of service, Victoria added, not quite meeting my eyes. Your contribution to Northwell has been significant. I was offered a modest severance package contingent on a 2-week transition period and signing a standard non-disparagement agreement. Nothing about the proprietary encryption library or my continuing ownership rights. Either they hadn't read the licensing agreement, or they didn't think it mattered. Is there anything you'd like to discuss about the transition? Victoria asked, her tone suggesting she hoped the answer was no. I considered my options carefully. I could raise the issue of Johnson Secure now, making it clear that they didn't have rights to continue using it. I could demand additional compensation or threaten legal action. But something told me to wait. Let them discover the problem on their own. No, I said finally. I think everything's clear. For the final 2 weeks, I was the model departing employee. I documented additional systems, answered questions, and even helped troubleshoot a few issues with the prototype of the new platform. No one seemed to notice that I never fully explained how Johnson Secure integrated with the audit logging system or the customer data vault. On my last day, there was a small gathering in the break room. People I'd worked with for years shuffled awkwardly, ate cake, and made vague comments about keeping in touch. Victoria made a brief appearance, thanked me again for my service, and disappeared back to her office. As I packed the last of my belongings, Michael stopped by my desk. This place won't be the same without you, he said, genuine sadness in his voice. No, I agreed. It certainly won't. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Mom, I need money for next semester's books. Dad said to ask you since it's your turn. No hello. No how are you. Just a financial request. I stared at the screen, tears welling up unexpectedly. This was what our relationship had become, transactional. I had taught her, through years of prioritizing my work, that I was someone to call only when something was needed, not someone to share her life with. Of course, I texted back. How much do you need? Then, after a pause, I'd love to see you soon. Maybe lunch next weekend? The reply came an hour later. $450. Can't do lunch, midterms coming up. I sent the money immediately, adding, good luck with midterms. I'm here if you need anything. Love you. No response came. Like my contributions at Northwell, my maternal offerings now seemed to disappear into a void. The aftermath and reconciliation. Life after Northwell was surprisingly peaceful. I took a month off, caught up on sleep, and reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my workaholic years. I updated my resume but didn't immediately look for a new position. 12 years at one company had left me financially secure enough to be selective about my next move. For the first time in years, I had space to think about something other than work. I found myself looking through old photo albums, tracing Lisa's childhood through birthdays and holidays, noticing how my presence in the photos became less frequent as the years progressed. On impulse, I drove to her university one afternoon, not calling ahead for fear she'd find a reason to avoid me. The campus was bustling with young people moving purposefully between classes. I felt out of place, an interloper in my daughter's world. I found her coming out of the science building, laughing with a friend. She looked so much like me at that age, the same determined walk, the same way of tucking her hair behind her ear when concentrating. But there was something of David in her too, in the easy way she smiled. Her face registered surprise, then wariness when she saw me. "Mom? What are you doing here?" "I was in the area," I lied. "I thought maybe we could grab coffee." She hesitated, glancing at her watch. "I have class in an hour." "Perfect," I said, trying to sound casual. "There's a cafe right across the street." Over coffee, we stumbled through small talk, her classes, my job search. Then, gathering my courage, I said, "Lisa, I owe you an apology. A big one." She looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For not being there. For missing your ballet recitals and soccer games. For putting work first all those years." My voice caught. I thought I was building something important, something that would last. But I was wrong about what's truly important. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee. "Dad used to tell me that you loved your computer more than us," she said finally. The words hurt, but I deserved them. "It wasn't the computer," I said softly. "It was what I could create with it. I felt valued there, respected for my skills in a way I wasn't at home. But I see now what that cost me, what it cost us." To my surprise, Lisa reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. "I'm not saying it's okay," she said, "but I understand a little better now. My roommate's mom is a surgeon, and she says the same thing, that her mom was always at the hospital for everyone else's emergencies. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start, an opening I hadn't dared hope for." Occasionally, I would receive LinkedIn messages from former Northwell colleagues, mostly casual check-ins. But about 2 months after my departure, the messages took on a different tone. "Hope you're doing well. Quick question. Do you remember how the compliance logging was configured for the financial services module? Having some issues with the audit trails." I provided vague answers, nothing they couldn't have figured out from the documentation I'd left behind. But the questions kept coming, growing more frequent and more specific. "Where exactly is the Johnson Secure integration documented? Do you have any notes on the custom credentialing protocols? Can you clarify how the token validation process interfaces with the encryption layer?" I knew what was happening without being told. The new system was hitting roadblocks, specifically around the secure components built on Johnson Secure. Without detailed knowledge of my custom library, they were struggling to replicate its functionality. One evening, my phone rang. Michael's number. "Hey," I answered. "How's it going?" There was background noise on his end, voices raised in what sounded like a heated discussion. "It's a total disaster," he said, his voice low. "The new platform went live last week and everything's falling apart. Authentication is failing across departments. We've got data leaking between client instances, and the compliance team is freaking out because the audit logs aren't capturing the required information." "That sounds serious," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Serious doesn't begin to cover it. We've got a major contract on hold because we can't prove compliance with their security requirements. Brandon is nowhere to be found, literally. He's not responding to calls or emails. And Victoria." He lowered his voice further. "Victoria is looking for someone to blame." I didn't respond immediately, digesting this information. Part of me felt vindicated. They disregarded my expertise and were now facing the consequences. but I'd spent 12 years building Northwell's platform. Despite everything, I didn't want to see it fail catastrophically. I'm sorry to hear that, I said finally. I hope they figure it out. Sarah, Michael said, frustration evident in his voice. You know they can't figure it out without you. Nobody understands how Johnson Secure works. We didn't even realize how central it was to the entire security architecture until everything started breaking. I remained silent. They're going to call you, he continued. Victoria's been in meetings with the board all day. Just when they do call, remember that not everyone agreed with how they treated you. After hanging up, I sat in my living room thinking. This was exactly the scenario I had anticipated, though perhaps sooner than expected. The question was, how would I respond when they reached out? My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Thanks for coffee the other day. Maybe dinner next weekend? My treat. I stared at the message, a warmth spreading through my chest that I hadn't felt in years. I'd love that, I texted back. Just name the time and place. In that moment, I realized that whatever happened with Northwell, I finally had a chance to repair what truly mattered. The code could wait. My daughter couldn't. I didn't have to wait long to find out how Northwell would approach me. The next morning, my phone displayed Victoria's name. I let it go to voicemail. She called twice more before sending a text. Sarah, we need to discuss an urgent matter regarding the platform. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I didn't respond. Instead, I called my attorney, Rebecca Morgan. We'd worked together years ago when I was setting up the licensing for Johnson Secure, and I trusted her judgment. They've backed themselves into a corner, she said after I explained the situation. Legally, they can't continue using your library without a valid license, and practically, they can't fix their problems without your expertise. So what do you suggest? Let me handle the communication, Rebecca said. If you're willing to help them, we should formalize terms that recognize your value. And Sarah, your value just went up considerably. Before meeting with Northwell, I had dinner with Lisa as promised. Over pasta at her favorite restaurant, she opened up about her struggles in college, her aspirations for the future, her fears of not measuring up. I always thought you had it all figured out, Mom, she said. You always seemed so sure of everything. I laughed softly. I was terrified most of the time. I just got really good at hiding it. Even now, with all your experience, especially now, I admitted. I'm about to negotiate with a company that fired me, and I'm scared they'll find some way to take advantage of me again. Lisa studied me for a moment, her expression serious. Don't let them. You're smarter than they are. You built something they can't even understand without you. Then she smiled. Besides, I like to think being stubborn runs in the family. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like a mother again. Not perfect, not even adequate maybe, but present in a way I hadn't been for years. The resolution. 3 days later, I sat across from Victoria in a downtown law office, Rebecca beside me. The conference room had that distinctive tension of lawyers trying to be cordial while preparing for battle. Victoria's team included Northwell's general counsel and a representative from the board. Victoria looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back severely. The platform meltdown was clearly taking its toll. Let's be direct, Rebecca began. Northwell is currently using proprietary software licensed to them under specific terms. Those terms included Sarah's continued involvement with the platform. Since that relationship has been terminated, the license is effectively revoked. Northwell's lawyer frowned. The software was developed while Miss Johnson was an employee. As a separate project, Rebecca interrupted, with clear documentation establishing her ownership. I have the original licensing agreement here, signed by Northwell's previous CTO. She slid a document across the table. You'll note paragraph 7 specifically addresses termination conditions. There was a tense silence as they reviewed the document. I watched Victoria's face as the reality of the situation sank in. Setting aside the legal technicalities, Victoria said finally, we have an immediate practical problem. Critical systems are failing. Client data is at risk. We need assistance restoring functionality, and Sarah is prepared to provide that assistance, Rebecca replied smoothly, under the right conditions. I listened as Rebecca outlined our terms: a 6-month consulting retainer at triple my former salary, full authorship credit and reinstated developer license ownership, and a formal acknowledgement of my role in the platform's architecture. Victoria winced at the salary figure, but didn't immediately reject it. The board representative leaned over to whisper something to her. After a brief discussion, Victoria straightened in her chair. "We can agree to the financial terms," she said, "but the acknowledgement creates a complicated precedent." "It's not complicated at all," I interjected, speaking for the first time. "You're using my work. You're asking for my help. Acknowledge that publicly." The room fell silent again. I could see Victoria calculating, weighing her pride against the mounting crisis at Northwell. "We'll need time to discuss internally," the board representative finally said. "Of course," Rebecca replied, "but I should note that Sarah has received inquiries from other organizations. Her schedule is filling up quickly." It was a bluff, but an effective one. Victoria's expression tightened. "Give us 24 hours," she said. They didn't need that long. By that evening, Rebecca received a counter-proposal that accepted most of our terms, with minor adjustments to the consulting timeline. After a brief discussion, I agreed. The next morning, I walked back into Northwell's offices, not as an employee, but as a consultant with clearly defined authority. The development team's relief was palpable. Michael actually hugged me when I arrived, whispering, "Thank God you're back." I spent the next week diagnosing and fixing the critical issues with the platform. It wasn't particularly challenging. Most of the problems stemmed from fundamental misunderstandings about how Johnson Secure integrated with the other security modules. Once those were resolved, the system stabilized. What was most satisfying wasn't the generous consulting fee or even the public acknowledgement of my work. It was watching the gradual realization spread across the organization that the legacy system they'd been so eager to replace wasn't outdated. It was sophisticated, purpose-built, and highly effective. Brandon never returned to Northwell. I heard through the grapevine that Victoria quietly shelved the modernization project after my initial fixes proved successful. I completed my contracted work in just under a month, provided comprehensive documentation of Johnson Secure, this time with no omissions, and walked out of Northwell for the second time, my reputation restored and my future secure. Unlike the first departure, this time I left with plans, not just professional ones, but personal ones too. Lisa and I had tickets to a weekend getaway in the mountains, something we hadn't done since she was in middle school. She was bringing her boyfriend, a quiet engineering student she'd been seeing for 6 months. "I want him to meet you properly," she'd said. "Not just a 5-minute introduction at Christmas." The words had filled me with both joy and trepidation. Being known as a mother again, really known, meant being vulnerable in ways I'd forgotten how to be. Epilogue. New beginnings. 6 months after my consulting engagement with Northwell ended, I received an unexpected email from Thomas Wilson, the original founder. He'd been following the company from afar and had heard about the platform disaster through his network. "Incredible work," he wrote. "Not just the technical aspects, but how you handled the whole situation. It reminded me why I hired you in the first place." He was starting a new venture focused on secure logistics for healthcare suppliers and wanted to discuss a potential role. We met for coffee the following week. "I need someone who can build things right from scratch," he explained. "Someone who understands that flashy isn't always better, and I'm prepared to offer equity this time." 2 weeks later, I joined Cypress Health as Chief Technology Officer with a substantial equity stake and a clear mandate to build secure, reliable systems my way. There was one condition I insisted on that surprised Thomas: flexible hours that would allow me to attend important family events. "My daughter is finishing college soon," I explained. "I've missed too much already." Thomas, a father of 3 himself, had nodded in understanding. "The system will always be there tomorrow," he said. "The moments with family won't." Meanwhile, changes were happening at Northwell. Victoria stepped down as CTO, citing personal reasons that everyone understood were related to the platform fiasco. The modernization project was officially canceled, and the company quietly began rebuilding around the original platform architecture, with proper credit given to its creator. My experience had made me something of a legend in Portland's tech community. I was invited to speak at conferences about system architecture and security design. At one such event, I bumped into Brandon in the hallway. He was trying to pitch his services to a group of startup founders, using the same buzzwords and flashy slides. When he saw me, he quickly excused himself and disappeared into the crowd. The most satisfying moment came when Northwell's board chair reached out personally to apologize for how the situation had been handled and to ask if I would consider joining the company's technical advisory board. I declined politely, explaining that my new role kept me fully occupied. "That's unfortunate," he said. "Your expertise would be invaluable." Yes, I agreed. It would. At Cypress Health, I built a new platform with all the lessons learned from my years at Northwell. It was modern without being trendy, secure without being cumbersome, and most importantly, fully documented and properly attributed. I assembled a team of developers who valued substance over style, thorough testing over rapid deployment. Instead of Brandon's approach of chasing every new technology trend, we focused on selecting the right tools for each specific task. But the most significant change wasn't in my professional life. It was in the small apartment I'd moved into downtown, closer to the waterfront where Lisa and I now took weekend walks when she was home from college. She'd graduate next month, and for the first time in years, I would be sitting in the front row, not rushing in late from some work emergency or missing it entirely. 1 year after joining Cypress Health, we launched our platform. The healthcare logistics industry took notice immediately. Our security-first approach resonated strongly in a sector dealing with sensitive patient data and complex compliance requirements. Thomas and I had a clear vision: build something that worked exceptionally well, explain it clearly, and let the results speak for themselves. No buzzwords, no exaggerated claims, just solid technology solving real problems. Johnson Secure evolved too. I open-sourced a version of it, maintaining a proprietary extension for our specific needs at Cypress Health. The open source community embraced it, contributing improvements and expanding its capabilities. 3 years into this new chapter, Cypress Health was acquired by a major healthcare technology provider. The valuation was heavily influenced by our platform's reputation for security and reliability. My equity stake meant I could retire if I wanted to, but the work was too satisfying to walk away from. I stayed on as CTO with expanded responsibilities and a team that had grown from 5 to 50. Every new hire heard the story of Northwell, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in the value of building things right and standing up for your work. But they also heard another lesson I now shared equally passionately: the importance of balance. Your greatest code will never love you back, I would tell them during orientation. Build systems to last, absolutely, but build your personal relationships to last too. The acquisition made headlines in the industry press. Several former Northwell colleagues reached out to congratulate me, including Michael, who is now looking for a new opportunity himself. I hired him immediately. On the day the acquisition was finalized, Lisa called me. She had just been accepted to graduate school for computer science and wanted my advice, not just about the program, but about how to balance the demands of a technical career with a personal life. "I don't want to make the same mistakes," she said. "But I also don't want to hold myself back." Looking at my daughter, now a young woman making her own way in the world, I realized that the mistakes of the past couldn't be erased, but perhaps they could be redeemed. That she would even ask me for this kind of guidance felt like a gift I didn't deserve but treasured all the same. "It's not about never making mistakes," I told her. "It's about recognizing them before they cost you what matters most." Looking back on my journey from Northwell to Cypress Health, I realized that true success wasn't about fighting against change, but about standing firmly in the value of your work while remembering what gives that work meaning in the first place. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't just letting your code speak for itself, but letting it speak for a life well balanced.